One of Dickinson's primary assumptions is that we cannot know the world once and for all, that our modes of perception are limited, and that there is a chronic gap between what we think about the world and how the world really is. Strangely, this does not upset her much at all. In fact, this gap for her is an invitation, an empty space, inviting her to fill it up with her imagination. So there's several poems I want to glance at right now that show what I'm going to call her generative skepticism. And that is, again, her sense that we cannot know the world once and for all. This world is not conclusion, a species stands beyond. But this unknowing, this lack of an ability to know, is not a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing, again, because into the inscrutability, we can endlessly cast our imaginations. So, to dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous for windows, superior for doors. That very sense that the world is a place of possibility is predicated on the fact that there is no fundamental actuality that we can know and base our experience on. So let me begin by taking a look at some lines that show this generative skepticism. In poem 1103, she writes, "Perception of an object costs precise the object's loss. Perception in itself again replying to its price. The object absolute is naught. Perception sets it fair, and then upbraids a perfectness that situates so far." There's an intricate poem, but one basic idea in this poem is that the minute that we perceive an object and identify an object, name an object, describe an object, we lose it. Because, again, our instruments of perception push an object away as much as pull an object to us. If I say, oh, that's a bird, well, yeah, it's kind of a bird, but it's also a lot that is not a bird, meaning it's that creature, that being, that thing has qualities, energies that simply cannot be captured by my language, by my concept, by my perception. This is another example of how a species stands beyond. No matter what we say about the world, our description is never adequate to how the world actually is. Another poem to look at in this regard would be, let me take a look at my notes here. Yes, "To Hear an Oriole Sing." Here it is. "To hear an oriole sing may be a common thing or only a divine. It is not of the bird who sings the same unheard as in unto crowd. The fashion of the ear attireth that it hear in dun or fair. So whether it be rune or whether it be none is of within. The tune is in the tree. The skeptic showeth me, no, sir, in thee." So how the world appears to us is dictated by our perspective, perhaps by our mood, perhaps by simply where we're standing, perhaps by the kind of person we are. So whether the bird song will be clothed in dun, a boring brown, or whether it be manifested in rune, some kind of mysterious script, that is decided by your disposition. So we, based on our perspective, dictate how the world will appear to us. So it's hard to say if what we're hearing is real or not. Is this what's really coming from that creature over there in the tree, or is this just something that's sounding in my own ears? In other words, is what we call knowledge really just subjective impression? So another poem along these lines, and again, I should note that this poem, "To Hear an Oriole Sing," opens up the possibility of creativity. That if we can't finally once and for all know an object, but ultimately we kind of make the object when we perceive it, well, that suggests that perception itself can be creative, that I can choose to present the bird in rune or anything else that I would like as opposed to done. And along these lines, more positive renderings of the skepticism is the poem "The Robin's My Criterion for Tune." Let's see there, and it goes like this: "The robin's my criterion for tune, because I grow where robins do. If I were born where cuckoos were born, I would have other criteria for tunes. If I were born in Britain, I would see the world in a different way. But I see New Englandly. The Queen discerns like me provincially. So if I were in England, I would have a different landscape, a different environment, and that environment would have shaped my character, and therefore when I perceive the world, I have that environment downloaded in me, as it were. So the birds that I hear in England, say cuckoos, that will be my measure of the beauty of birdsong. But because I live in New England and I've heard robins sing a lot, the robin's my criterion for tune. So you might say, oh, well, that's limiting. But Dickinson says, no, I see New Englandly, and that makes me kind of a queen. Everyone sees provincially, even queens. And there's something powerful about that, because if the robin being my criterion for tune, that locates me, that grounds me in a particular geography. And that geography shapes me and allows me to appreciate it at an intense level. One more poem that explores this generative skepticism that I've been referring to, and that is the poem "The Brain is Wider Than the Sky." A wonderful poem. Well, I had it marked. Sorry. Here we go. The brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side, the one the other will contain with ease, and you beside. The brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them blue to blue, the one the other will absorb as sponges buckets do. The brain is just the weight of God, for heft them pound for pound, and they will differ, if they do, as syllable from sound. So how's the brain wider than the sky? When I perceive the sky, it is in my brain. That is the only way I know the sky. That is the sky to me, what appears in my brain. So my brain, in this way, contains the sky. Same with the ocean. The ocean is to me only as a mental concept, and therefore my brain contains the ocean. These are very witty paradoxes, metaphysical conceits almost. The last stanza is very interesting. The brain doesn't contain God, she says. It's just the weight of God. And if you hold God in one hand and the brain in the other, this is classic Dickinson weirdness, they will differ if they do, suggesting that the mind and God might be exactly the same, that the way our mind creates our reality makes us gods, or that any concept of God that we have is not some creature, metaphysical creature, but simply a mental concept we have. And they will differ if they do, as syllable from sound. So, what is a syllable? A syllable is a meaningful sonic unit that is a part of a larger whole. When you break a word down into syllables, you're breaking it down into its component sound units, and when you put these sound units together, they compose a larger, meaningful unit, a word. So a syllable is a sound with significance, whereas a sound here seems to be a sound without significance, which could be just meaningless gobbledygook. It could be just some kind of monotonous, we don't know. But there's a sense here that one sound is meaningful, it's discrete, and segmented and ultimately part of a larger system, and sound simply as a sonic occurrence. Which is which? Is God the sound unarticulated, and is the brain the sound chopped up into meaningful units, or is it the other way around? We don't know. So by the time we get to the end of this poem, it itself cannot be contained by the brain. So that's the irony here, that she's talking about the power of the brain to contain these vast spaces, these vast powers, or to be equal to God. But by the time we get to the end, there's an irreducible ambiguity. So strangely enough, this poem itself cannot be contained by our brains. And that's a good thing. Dickinson seems to suggest here and elsewhere, because there's a place for the sublime, a place for powers that go beyond our brain, but yet that call forth our brain to try to make sense of them with new systems, new patterns, new images, new products of the imagination. So this is Generative Skepticism and Emily Dickinson.